Have you ever heard of someone whose power came not from wealth, not from swords or crowns, but from the healing wisdom hidden in the roots of plants and the whispers of old stories? Today we are about to step into a world almost forgotten, a world where knowledge itself was currency, and where a single woman's gift became so powerful, it was both respected and feared. In this video, you will learn about a healer whose story challenges everything you think you know about strength, survival, and dignity. Stay with me. What you'll hear next could change how you see history, human resilience, and the power that lies in knowing your own worth. Imagine a place where a person's fate is controlled by others, where every day is a struggle for survival, and where hope is a rare commodity. This was the reality for millions of enslaved people in the American South. Life was harsh, brutal, and unforgiving. But even in the darkest corners of history, light finds a way to shine, and that light often came through those who carried ancient knowledge that was whispered from generation to generation, passed down through secret lessons in the dead of night, hidden in the folds of everyday struggle. This was the world of the healer we are about to meet. She was not born into freedom. She was owned like property, by people who saw her only as labor. Yet what they could not take away was her mind, her spirit, and her deep connection to the healing arts, a connection rooted in traditions that stretched back to continents and cultures far away. This woman learned to read the language of herbs, to listen to the secret messages of roots and blossoms, and to bring relief where others brought pain. Her hands were gentle, but her knowledge was fierce, and soon, the whispers about her began to spread. At first it was among the enslaved people who suffered without doctors, without medicine, without care. They came to her with fevers, with wounds, with pain that made them lose hope, and she healed them. But news of her gifts did not stay hidden. Even those who held power took notice, not always with admiration, sometimes with fear. Because her knowledge did something the system of oppression could never tolerate. It gave people something they believed was beyond their reach. It gave them hope. And when someone under bondage holds hope, that knowledge becomes something stronger than chains. In this video, you'll discover not just the story of a healer, but the story of how knowledge can be a form of resistance. You'll learn how her healing skills made people see her differently, not as someone weak or insignificant, but as someone with value no one could fully control. You'll see how a woman with no title, no wealth, and no freedom changed the way people thought about power and survival. By the end of this journey, you won't just know her name. You'll understand why her legacy matters. You'll understand how wisdom passed through generations can challenge fear and rewrite narratives. So stay with me, because what comes next is not just history, it is inspiration, remembrance, and a testament to the unwavering strength of the human spirit. Before we talk about the world of healers, we have to understand the brutal plantation system that formed the backdrop of their lives, especially in Mississippi, where cotton fields stretched as far as the eye could see. Life on a Mississippi plantation was not just difficult, it was a harsh, constant struggle for survival under a system built entirely on forced labor and oppression. These were enormous farms, often growing cotton, where white owners wielded absolute power and enslaved African Americans provided the labor that made them wealthy. From the moment the sun rose, enslaved people were expected to work without question. There were no weekends, no holidays, no real rest. Men, women, and even children were organized into work gangs that labored in the fields from sunrise until sunset. Their days were filled with planting, hoeing, picking, and harvesting crops, especially cotton, which was extremely profitable and demanded relentless effort. Overseers with whips or verbal threats kept everyone moving, pushing them to meet grueling quotas day after day. The work was physically exhausting and unrelenting. There were no safety rules, no breaks beyond short meals, and no compassion from those in charge. If work was too slow, punishments could follow: beatings, deprivation of food, or worse. Illness was common because of the hard labor, poor nutrition, and exposure to the elements. Many plantations did not provide adequate medical care, leaving the sick and injured to rely on one another or simply endure their suffering. Where they lived was just as hard as the labor they endured. Enslaved people typically lived in small, crowded cabins with dirt floors that offered little protection from heat, cold, or rain. These cabins were functional at best, barely a shelter, and showed how little regard slave owners had for the comfort or dignity of those they enslaved. Basic necessities like quality food, clean clothes, and proper medical care were rarely provided. What rations they did receive, usually cornmeal and salt pork, were barely enough to sustain the extreme levels of physical exertion expected of them. Despite the brutality, enslaved people found ways to preserve aspects of their culture and humanity. They planted small gardens of their own, growing vegetables and raising animals to supplement the meager food rations. Some learned trades such as carpentry, blacksmithing, or weaving, which gave them skills that were sometimes rented out to neighbors or used to earn a small amount of money. In moments when the overseers were not watching, on Sundays or after long days, they sang songs, shared stories and forged bonds that helped sustain them emotionally and spiritually. On these plantations, relationships were complicated. Families could be separated without warning, sold off to different owners far away. Yet within the quarters, enslaved people managed to create tight-knit communities based on kinship, shared struggle, and mutual support. They formed friendships, traditions and networks that stretched across plantation boundaries, helping each other survive in a system designed to strip them of dignity and hope. To understand the world that produced a healer like Annie Turner, it's essential to grasp this harsh reality. Mississippi plantations were places of tremendous pain and exploitation, but they were also places where people fought to survive, physically, emotionally and culturally, every single day. Before we talk about the extraordinary healer whose wisdom changed lives under the worst conditions, we need to understand an incredible truth. Many enslaved people brought with them deep knowledge of herbal and healing practices from Africa and their native lands, and they adapted that wisdom to their new harsh reality in America. This was not random or accidental. It was a rich legacy passed down through generations, a silent language of roots, leaves, barks, and natural remedies that had sustained families and communities long before they were torn from their homes and forced into slavery. When enslaved Africans boarded the ships that carried them across the Atlantic, they did not leave behind everything they knew. Even in the terrible conditions of the Middle Passage, some carried seeds, herbs, or memories of their traditional plants. Once they arrived in the American South, they began to recognize and seek out familiar and new plants in the forests, fields and wetlands surrounding the plantations. They learned to read the landscape with the same instinct their ancestors had in Africa. They learned which plants could soothe pain, which could reduce fevers, and which could help the body heal itself. This knowledge became a lifeline in the context of slavery, where legal medical care for black people was almost non-existent. Plantation owners rarely cared for the health of those they enslaved, and enslaved